You're live.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee meeting. This is February 16th. We're starting at 12:30. We're going to be reviewing the ERP project. We got a little bit of a late start due to some business on the floor. So we'll do a kind of a compressed summary of where we're at for the project, and then kind of dig into some Q&A. The first agenda item we had was going to be discussing the next meeting. So tentatively, we were planning on March 19th from 11 to 1 to give us a little bit more time. Does that work for you two?
The weekend.
To Tuesday,
That's right.
March 19th, from 11 to 1. Senate usually starts at 9:30, so
Yeah.
hope was
So
that
we go, in our morning committee, we go till noon
Okay.
Would, but
normally. Yeah,
so I can cut it early.
it's been, year and a half, it's been noon every time.
Okay.
My morning committee.
Well, let's circle back to that after when we don't have folks wait for us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa to give us a bit of a review of the history of the project to bring everybody up to speed. And then hear from our executive sponsors for a couple of quick minutes, and then minutes of Q&A.
Great.
Please.
For the record, my name is Lisa. I'm the IT consultant with JFO. So the topic today is a recent memo that I drafted, and it was to provide an update on the ERP project review and also some background facts for the project. So this project has total funds appropriated of $24.6 million. And there's 11.8 million that is being held per approval of release by JITOC. And the reason this was put on hold when it was appropriated was there wasn't enough information to do a complete JFO IT review for the project. The state is currently undergoing an independent review, which is the state CIO's independent review for all projects over $1 million. And so I'm waiting for information about that review, which should be released towards the end of March. And when that's released, I'll also get a whole tranche of documents about the project that I will use for my review and present those findings to JITOC. So currently, the cost of the projects, we have a contract signed with Workday, which is an ERP vendor, the state of Vermont does, totaling almost just short of $29 million for a 10-year contract. Currently, 2 payments have been made on that contract, totaling $2.35 million. And that project hasn't started yet. The contract was signed, and then with anticipation that they would be releasing an RFP and implementing in the fall, but for various reasons that was postponed. So we're sort of in a bit of a crunch, missing the first 2 years of that contract. So the year 3 payment, which was scheduled to be due and invoiced in May-June timeframe, was just over $2 million. It's scheduled to be over $2 million, but Secretary Riley Hughes managed to negotiate a deferral of that payment. And it'll be spread out over the final 5 years of the contract, so still be paid. I don't have that new contract yet. I haven't received it yet. And so once I do, I'll report back on, all of the terms of that contract to confirm what else might be there, if there is any other terms that we should be aware of. Let's see what else. So one of the concerns that I'll be looking at when I do this review is look at the potential for gaps in the project that have not been identified. So during the course of an IT project, a gap analysis is done. which will tell you what the system will cover and what it won't. So I'll be looking at the status of what information is available about the total scope of the project, what it takes to replace Vision, which is the state financial system, which this project will replace, in the state HR system. And so I'll be looking at that in particular, because that's where areas of costs might not be revealed, might not be available. We won't necessarily, without having a gap analysis, we won't know what the potential is for gaps in the project. The state of Rhode Island is also currently working on a Workday implementation. They would be the first state to go live at the statewide level with the finance management module. So Secretary Riley Hughes is watching that project closely to see how that is going. And like I said, the full review will be done in March, and then I will start my review. I think the key pieces are the gap analysis that I'll be looking at. I mentioned that. And also other plans of, what are they planning on? What's the plans for the historical data? And also the plan for updating the state ERP system. Remember, one of the reasons why the state wants to get away from Vision, they want to avoid those time-consuming, costly updates of the system. And with Workday, it's a pretty generic piece of software, and they roll out updates a couple times a year. But my question is, don't we have to still test those updates, especially in areas where there are integrations to other systems or functions that are currently done by Vision but not accomplished by Workday? So that's my quick update. There's a link to this document on the page for this meeting. Anybody wants to see it, and I'm ready to turn it over to the state. I'm here for questions too.
Secretary Riley Hughes and Deputy Secretary Clark, if you'd like to join us. Hi.
For the record, Denise Riley Hughes, Secretary of Digital Services, and Sarah Clark, the Deputy Secretary of Administration. Regarding what Lisa just shared, so the open procurement is on track right now. We had the IR vendor interviews, and they're in the process right now of developing the report, and we expect that in the next few weeks. The hope is that we have that report reviewed and the CIO meeting scheduled before the 19th, if that is the date that we meet, because I'd like to make sure that we can provide you with additional detail of progress. The deferment itself went through PAT review today, and I just was told that it's in signature for the Workday team to sign first. Yes?
Abbreviations.
Oh, I'm sorry. The procurement advisory team.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Imagine that in just a short year, I'm already speaking some acronyms. And so for the terms of that, it is, as was stated, it is 20% per year over the last 5 years, which would be based on the terms of the project where we would be go live. So there are no additional terms there. It is just a flat 20% spread across the last 5 years. There is so the IR vendor opened us up to yet additional information and opportunity for the state. So they are one of the implementers for state of Washington right now. And interestingly enough, they just signed up as one of the state of Vermont's IR vendors and the independent review. So during the interviews, we did identify that there is a state cohort for Workday being established. That would be Washington, Rhode Island. There's a couple of other states involved. And so Vermont was invited to participate in that as well. So I think when we look at the long-term success of this, that making sure that we're working collaboratively with other states that are in the same boat as us and doing the same things, it's really important.
Great. So maybe I can provide an update on the budget adjustment request that was submitted. If you recall, the governor's budget adjustment included $3 million to support business transformation costs associated with this project. Secretary Riley Hughes and I, as new eyes on the project, really in the last 6 months to a year, have taken an approach that the business and the technology needs to be kind of fully represented from a funding perspective, and as we work together to move forward. And so that's one of the reasons why we requested $3 million to support the business transformation costs on this project. The original request for appropriation over the last, let's say, 4 years reflected at that time, what was known to be the technology costs on the project. And so that's why it was important to come forward with some funds to support the business transformation. So as budget adjustment has moved through the House and the Senate, instead of allocating new general fund for that purpose, they have, through language, directed the state. And as you know, budget adjustment's still in process, right? But both the House and Senate have directed us to use up to $3 million from the existing appropriation of $11.8 million. That is an appropriation to the Agency of Digital Services from the IT Tech Modernization Special Fund. So saying that, one of the recommendations that we're going to submit in writing when and if there's a conference committee, I'm assuming there will be on the budget adjustment, we're going to submit a recommendation that instead of directing the funds to the tech modernization portion of it, which involves some relatively more complicated construct to make sure that we can track the money in the tech mod fund and then give the business the funding that it needs to move forward. We're going to recommend instead that they use the general fund appropriation that is to the Agency of Administration. Lisa, I think, details that in her memo, the 2 pots of money that have been allocated for this project. And so I'm raising this to you as it's an issue that Denise and I have kind of brought to the table, working together, needing to fund that side of the project as well. And as we continue to work with the legislature to make sure that we are providing funding for business transportation. We wanted to raise transformation, not transportation. Thank you.
And sorry if you just covered this and I'm not understanding, but I thought that you needed JITOC approval for the 11.8. So how can you use a portion of that without approval?
So that's another one of the, so the 11.8 is the JITOC Tech Modernization Appropriation, the Agency of Digital Services. The 12.8 million is a general fund appropriation to the Agency of Administration that doesn't have those same parameters around it. I think that appropriation happened before the tech mod appropriation. And so that's, in addition to kind of accounting simplicity, that's another reason to point to the general fund appropriation. However, I think both the House and the Senate included language related to business transformation that still requires updates to this committee on the business transformation. I don't know why I keep saying that. Business transformation components of the work in budget adjustment.
Sorry, I'm still, understanding it's a second pot of money, but is it still going towards the pot of money that we are supposed to be? So is it then making your pot of money that we're supposed to approve 8.8?
Yeah, so that's when we testified on this budget adjustment request, that's one of our concerns, is that we know we don't have sufficient funding to support the project. And so diverting $3 million from the existing project funds for business transformation purposes does put further pressure on the funding associated with the project. But this was part of the budget adjustment that passed the House and the Senate, and I expect will go to conference committee next week.
And in that conversations in the other committees, was it discussed about backfilling it at the end or just?
Yeah, I think we were clear and there would be a need for additional funding if kind of regardless, but definitely with the $3 million kind of divergence from the original appropriations. I think both committees acknowledge that, but due to funding challenges that they're facing, ultimately move forward with this change in the budget adjustment. I feel like this, I'm bringing some new information to
It's
this
just-
committee, so my apologies for that.
Yeah, Sarah, you said the House and the Senate both approved moving, and so, tell me about that approval. As a House member,
Approval of what
of
specifically?
moving those funds.
So both the House version of the budget adjustment, and I can share the specific language with you, and the Senate version directed us on this project to use the existing ADS appropriation from the IT Tech Modernization Fund for business transformation purposes. It included updating the statute surrounding the Tech Mod Fund to allow for business transformation costs.
Okay, I have another question. I'm gonna have to leave also, Mr. Chair, if I might. So I'm just, Sarah, while you're here, and this is something I brought up with Secretary Riley Hughes and with your predecessors. How are we doing on making this funding kind of part of regular budgeting? So, because of course, it can't be reliant on whether or not, budgeting whims, like this is critical infrastructure for running government and civic engagement and making sure that we can meet our commitments to Vermonters. So how are we doing on getting towards a regular funding mechanism here?
I'm working with Commissioner Gresham, so we should be meeting by the end of this month on starting those conversations. We've already framed that up, having been through my first budget iteration within the agency, but looking at how I'm seeing the presentation that we just had yesterday on our budget to House appropriations. We've got 5 areas where we do recovery in. This is not included in that yet. And so as we frame up really what the balance should be, instead of letting it continue under, I would call it a legacy model, that is something that Adam or Commissioner Gresham is assisting ADS to make sure that we are doing things according to the requirements of the state.
Yeah, because I've noted that we're worried about a shortage of funds for these projects, and so that's just not going to be acceptable. It's like saying we don't have enough money to finish building the bridge.
Yep. Great.
So, and with that, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to leave.
And if I may add, while you're walking out the door, I'm relatively new in this position, but in my 20 years of state government, there have been many of those years where we've talked about this exact issue, trying to identify an ongoing revenue source to pay really for the cost of doing business as a state and making sure our technology is able to stay up to date. And finding an ongoing mechanism to fund it is more challenging than I wish it was.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think we would say we can't fund the bridge. We have to figure it out. So, thank you. Sorry.
And if it's helpful to the committee, I can maybe follow up with working with Lisa to provide some information about what's happened in budget adjustment, just to make sure everybody understands what the recommendations were coming out of both the House and Senate budget adjustment.
Yeah, a couple questions. Given the deferred, is it
No, I'm listening.
okay? Given the deferred payment, in the kind of a agreement with Workday, is there any type of clause that covers what happens if the contract is hypothetically, like, if, not saying it's gonna happen, but if it was canceled, like, what happens to the deferred payments that have now like pushed out over the course of 5 years? Are you responsible for those, or?
Yes.
Okay. And then, do we have any type of idea, or does Lisa have any type of idea of formal agreements with Oracle and PeopleSoft? And like what the current costs are and what the ongoing kind of support, extended support costs are?
We have provided Lisa with the current license procurement vehicle. I wouldn't necessarily call it a contract. It's just a purchase for the licenses, which expires in 2025. We also have a support contract that expires in 26. Given that the environment holistically, each different product is sitting on a end of life version. There is no product beyond that in the way that we currently have it deployed, that those costs have not been shared by Oracle. And as I share the dates with you, you can see that the cost of that is going to change procurement over procurement and contract over contract. What I have identified through what we have deployed versus what is considered to be in support is there's a variance. There's a very big variance of that. And so there's also a model where features become de-supported monthly. And so even if a version that we're running is considered to be able to receive security patch updates, what it may not receive is tax updates. What it may not receive is portal updates, things that would be critical. And then anything that would be considered de-supported would now require us to either bring in the expertise internally, have the expertise internally, or pay quite a substantial amount of money to fix, resolve, or address. So from an estimation standpoint, it would be millions just to maintain something that is out end of life.
Senator, did you have your hand up? or-
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Um,
Looking at the state of Rhode Island, looks like they have similar modules they're implementing that what we're doing. Do we have any idea if their costs are in line with what we're planning on spending?
They are in line. They do have less employees. Their government structure is a little bit different and they only signed a 6-year contract for the licenses. Their implementation aligns pretty closely to ours. They were ahead in the business process transformation. And so we do see that as a pretty critical area that we need to action now. But we are very, very close in line with them.
And I want to add, as it relates to Rhode Island, I have also have heard some testimony, if you will, from the controller of Rhode Island, who is probably their equivalent of the executive sponsor on the business side. And so similar to Denise, I plan to engage with them so we can follow closely from both the technology and a business side to understand their project as it moves forward, benefit from their knowledge.
And I would say too, the state cohort that's being established too is something that I think would be add immense value to us.
If you have one last one, and then we've got to wrap up too. Okay.
For the current software that's being used and the costs that I was just asking about before, are those covered in the budget? Are other than what you were saying about not the potential?
Those are not being paid through any ADS mechanism.
So, and I would want to confirm this answer, but my understanding that the costs of the current system would be funded via our internal service fund structure and the costs of maintaining Vision, which is our accounting system, and the VTHR, which is our payroll system.
So we can provide projected estimates, but we don't know exactly.
And I think that'll actually, the independent review,
Yes.
it'll include that information. So when we are able, when that process is finalized and we're able to share that, you'll see some of that information there.
One more. Okay.
Just okay, do you mind? Just want to clarify when you said independent review. So because until we either sign a contract or terminate a procurement, any of these documentation items like the II report would be a good example. Those become public record at the end of the procurement cycle. And so I just want to make sure that there is not an intent to withhold any of that information for anyone. And in fact, we publish the independent reviews on our EPMO website and portal for ADS. But just a little bit of time and patience will help folks to have that available when we can in fact release it.
Last one. Just curious, so you said we're at end of life for the software that's currently deployed, mentioned the security patches, which would apply to like currently deployed stuff, but are we at max of capabilities of Oracle PeopleSoft as far as what is available? No, so say like Internet Explorer 7 or something, like end of life for software company that I work for, like we could keep doing security patches, but we didn't support like when our software was then only working on like Internet 10, Internet Explorer 10, like so are we at a Internet Explorer 7 type of thing and there's a Internet Explorer 10 option that we're just not pursuing? I'm just curious of like
No,
Okay.
Uh,
I agree, yeah.
send it unless a question, and then we've got a wrap.
So on the third page of Lisa's memo, I guess it is, it talks about how the $11.8 million are contingent upon JITOC approval. And yet, looking at the language in the Budget Adjustment Act, it mentions that $11.8 million. And it says the Commissioner of Finance and Management may transfer up to 3 million of these funds to other agencies and departments for ERP planning. I'm not sure how that money can be permitted to move when we haven't approved it yet.
I think I can probably answer that because it's in statute that is, well, presumably going to be signed that bypasses. It takes that out of having to have us approve it in JITOC.
Okay, so this document.
The remaining amount would, that's the current status, but because BAA hasn't been signed yet, that's the proposed. Does that sound
I think
accurate?
Partly, I think the accounting gets a little bit
Fuzzy.
more complicated because the Senate version, which we'll say is, you know, what they're going to be negotiating probably next week, it creates something called an interdepartmental transfer one-time appropriation, which is for $3 million basically, and it'll direct the Agency of Administration to spend from the interdepartmental transfer fund on business transformation costs with the idea that the funding will eventually be transferred from the Tech Mod Fund. And so we, like I said, we do have a recommendation that we're going to provide for the conferee's consideration. So it gets like, I love technical accounting stuff. I've made a career on it, but it gets, I think, a little bit like hard when we get down into the weeds, but we'll work to provide some information that clarifies the proposal and how it fits in this kind of complex structure where some of the funds need approval. Some of them don't need approval, but I want to be clear, and this committee knows it. JITOC has jurisdiction over the entire ERP project, right? Even though part of the funding requires specific approval, but you are still overseeing, as well as Lisa overseeing ERP project.
And with that, I hear the rest of my committee getting rambunctious out there. I'll send out a note about trying to reschedule for additional meetings. And Mike, if you